It's a big honor. I was so happy. Can you all hear me pretty well?
Yeah.
My mic fell off just as I was back there. So I use a much larger show and tell show. I'm an old high school teacher and I'm an old army doctor. And for my audiovisual slides, I actually went through the presentation last night. But I actually pulled out some transparencies in the overhead projector. So, with some apologies for the PowerPoint, I'm going back a ways with my PowerPoint. Some of the newer, I gotta get my teenage and my 20-year-old kids to help me with this. But this talk today is so important. Medical freedom in an age of tyranny. And what you just heard from the FBI agents, this might be a newsflash for you. You know, how hard is it to get physicians to take care of Medicaid patients in the state of Florida or any state in which you live? How hard is it to get doctors who actually take care of the poorest in our society? Well, one of the reasons, good thing I can a little agile, one of the reasons is that I have to submit myself to getting fingerprinted every 3 years to take care of Medicaid patients. I was just getting fingerprinted last week. Now go figure, I can take care of everybody else in the country, in the state of Florida, but just for Medicaid, they require us to be fingerprinted. And then of course, they don't pay us very much. It's also true with other insurances. And I'm gonna be talking to you today about why so many doctors are getting out of conventional medicine. And I'm gonna end with a hopeful note. That's what I'm all about, is hope. So let me go back there. I have the book back there. My goal is that anyone who wants a copy of that book today should basically get it. It took me 20 plus years to write it. It's written for my 4 daughters. I've got one that's don't worry, if I can grab that, that'd be great. This thing, if I put it here, it would have all fallen down. Thank you. 3 are school teachers and 1's a physician. And when I wrote this book or started writing this book, that's when the Gardasil vaccine first came out, all right? And they were and I was doing women's healthcare as I've done for 35 years, and I knew full well that not every 9, 10, 11-year-old child was not going to be sexually active, nor would they be a candidate for a vaccine against a sexually transmitted virus, human papillomavirus. I was doing colposcopies, all right? I treat pre-cancer of the cervix. I would show women, this is what your cervix looks like. And so I went to the meetings and I would ask questions. I'd say, why are we rolling these vaccines out for every 9, 10, and 11-year-old child in this country? Millions and millions of children. And the answer always was the same. Well, these children are going to get HPV. You might as well get them before they get sexually active. So your child, your daughter, my daughters are all going to get, oh yeah, you know what they did? The CDC, in conjunction with Merck, put out a campaign out across the entire country, and the posters, and what they sent to the doctors was that 90% of women will become infected with HPV in the course of their lives. 90%, so that means 9 out of 10 women here have gotten HPV? No, it's a lie. That was a statistic, and I knew this because I'd been to the meetings around the country, that they were basically taking a population of college students who'd gone to a Planned Parenthood clinic while in college to get birth control or whatever else, and they were being sampled, and about 18% were positive. And so they extrapolated from the 18% when they're 19 years old and said, oh, in the course of their lives, obviously this is not correct. Talk about misinformation, right? It was this misinformation that then brainwashed every pediatrician. Of course, they never see a vaccine that they don't fall in love with. And every family physician is about the same story, and every obstetrician to vaccinate your children and try to vaccinate my children against a sexually transmitted disease that's easily preventable and easily treatable. So I started writing the book then, and then I went on to just look at other controversies. I was one of the first people to write an article about something that was being utilized in tens of thousands of women across the country and across the world, a contraceptive device known as Essure. Essure were 2 cyelastic rods, one that were slid up into the women's fallopian tubes to basically sterilize them mechanically without having to do a tubal ligation. Well, those things were on the market only less than a year, and then women started showing up in the emergency rooms with ruptured fallopian tubes, bleeding, pain, emergency hysterectomies, and surgery, and even death. One activist named Erin Brockovich actually got on board that train and started to protect these women. You've all heard of Erin Brockovich probably. The point being that the FDA approved this device for tens of thousands, for millions of women. So did the CDC encourage it. The American College of OBGYN and doctors in our community right here in Orlando would not even tell women anything. They'd have their baby. Friends of mine that were OBGYNs, which tells you something, because these are friends of mine that are doing these things to women, or were, and they slide them up there and the women would have chronic pain and have to have the surgery later. Well, What does the FDA do in response to this? About 8 years ago, they said, okay, guys, you need to give every woman a 30-page consent form, 30 pages of informed consent before you slide those rods up into their fallopian tubes. That lasted about 6 weeks, and then the FDA took it off the market, but not after tens of thousands of women were adversely impacted to the point of death. But no, does anyone talk about that? Does anyone talk about the FDA being a misinformer, or OBGYNs not allowing women to make informed decisions about their own health care, or pediatricians telling patients your child doesn't need this vaccine? So I wrote this book called The Hidden Truth, Deception of Women's Healthcare, just before COVID it came out. And again, it's back there. I want you to have it just so you can see how much the CDC, the FDA, and Big Pharma were all working together with the federal and state governments, mind you, and the health departments to convince doctors that you, the patient, did not deserve to be able to make informed decisions, that there's another agenda at work. So one of the things that fell down here is, so we doctors don't have a lot of time to read anymore or do research, but we get a lot of free stuff. And the free stuff, actually, I have it here, so no big deal. This is one called Medical Economics. All right. Now, if there's one thing that every doctor needs to be able to do, I was asked earlier, how many patients do you need to see to be a successful family doctor? And that depends on what kind of model of healthcare you're in. But the reality is I don't go by numbers. I go by how many people need to see me from one day to the next. But if I don't know how to run my business as a doctor, I can't take care of patients. So we read medical economics, right? It tells you how to code properly, how to do things. Well, this article, this journal came out, if you look, it was clear back in July of 2019. July of 2019. This is before COVID, guys. July of 2019. And these are the statements that they were saying. The misinformers, doctors who are misinformers, were basically saying, they would say, you must emphasize vaccination as the norm in healthcare, all right? You must. It's time, this is what you need to say. Instead of giving them an option, just say to the parent, it's time for Johnny to get vaccinated. This is right out of the article. And then American Academy of Pediatrics came out and said, if you have non-compliant families, you need to get them out of your practices. And I'm sure, how many of you have had an experience or know of someone who's had an experience with a pediatrician who said, get out of my practice if your kids aren't vaccinated, right? And there's going to be more. Okay, my own daughter down in West Palm had to leave the practice because they would say to my daughter, my granddaughter, who was 1 year of age, was endangering the other kids in the pediatric practice. All right, this is in 2019. And then, let me go back here for a second. Yeah, okay, we're gonna get to that. All right. I think I'm doing the wrong direction. Okay, now we're good. And then you said you go that way. Very good. I'm left-handed, so I'm always gonna think. The anti-vax crisis. Okay, I'm not sure what that was. Okay, we have that. Thank you. This is very important. So I've always been thinking independently, and then this is when COVID happened. Shortly after this, I got a letter from Advent Health here in Orlando, and the letters from the Medical Executive Committee said just what you're reading there. The Dr. Littell, you've attempted to bring visitors, including 2 persons who had tested positive, into the hospital to visit a patient. You've been witness on multiple occasions not complying with PPE, and therefore you're fined $500 and suspended. Yes, I'm one of the suspendables. I like that. I was one of the suspendables. So you're suspended for two weeks. Later on, you'll find out about another organization that suspended me. But the reality is, all I did in this case was right down here in Kissimmee during the height of the COVID. There was a minister in the hospital who'd been on a ventilator. He contracted COVID while here in Orlando for a urological procedure. Right, came back to Kissimmee and subsequently got to the point of being on a ventilator with the COVID pneumonia. I was not allowed to treat him in any way, shape, or form the way I was treating people. Some of you may know I'm the guy who treated a lot of people with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and all that stuff. Right? One of many. I spoke to someone earlier, Michelle. Actually, one of our speakers earlier, Michelle, a physical therapist who was sneaking ivermectin into patients in the hospital. That's what we all were trying to figure out ways, but I couldn't treat this pastor who had a church right down there in Kissimmee, super pro-life. He created a pregnancy center. He had a home for unwed mothers. He was an amazing man, amazing man. And so when he'd been on the ventilator for over 3 weeks, that's when I said it's time for his family to see him. They were going to take him off the ventilator. He was clinically dumb. And that's when I got in trouble. I said, no, his son, who's going to be the succeeding pastor, his wife, they deserve to see him for the first time. He went as a healthy person for a urological procedure. They haven't seen him in 4 weeks. I'm bringing the family in. They're going to pray with him. And I don't care what the heck you guys say. They're going to pray with their dad before he's taken off the ventilator. And I got in trouble, and that's what they wrote. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff you all dealt with. And I didn't thank you, but we all have this PTSD about what we all went through. I can go on and on about the stories. But that was the first letter. That was sort of like the warning sign to me that the things I'm doing now in medicine are going to get me in a lot of trouble. But that's what you just heard from the previous group with the FBI, right? This is the kind of thing. I walk into the buildings in Ocala Health, for example, and they have these signs saying everyone here must wear a mask. And just so you know, I have that here with me because I took it down. Because I would just take them down. Because frankly, they're stupid. They're stupid. I got to the point where I would see doctors walking down empty hallways with masks on, or walking into the physician's lounge getting their food, or sitting at a computer with a mask on. Surgeons who I used to respect, and I say to the surgeon, way back when I was in the operating room with you guys, the first thing you told me to do with that surgical mask was to throw it off into the garbage, before you leave the operating room. It's dirty. It's a dirty mask. You don't walk around the hospital with a dirty OR mask. And as a matter of fact, the chief infectious disease officer right here in Orlando, who's a very good friend of mine, for the first 2 months of the COVID pandemic or scamdemic, whichever, he said to all the doctors, infectious disease, do not wear a mask in the hospital. You will be scaring people unnecessarily. And then within literally 2 weeks of him saying that, he was shut down by Advent Health, and he had to turn his message around. Why? Because Advent Health wanted to be the first hospital to put up billboards on I-4 and everywhere else that showed their employees with masks saying, we are the safe place. You come here, you will not get COVID because we're wearing masks, even in front of computers, even in empty hallways at 3 o'clock in the morning, even in the parking lots. And I mean, believe me, you have no idea how many conversations I had with doctors. It's a wonder that I'm not behind bars or with being to a cult. But this is the other, you'd be I had a great conversation with United Airlines because I didn't do this, right? I didn't wear a mask, and the guy next to me didn't have his mask on. And the flight's going on, and finally they said, you're going to get thrown off this plane. You all been through that. Well, we ended up becoming, this is why I'm here talking to you guys. So many friendships came up because you'd be with someone who didn't wear the mask. And you realize, hey, we got this figured out. That gentleman from Long Island, he's a contractor, very well-known contractor, builder in Long Island. When his family got COVID in Long Island, his parents who started the business, he called me in August of 21. I treated all of his family members. His father kept them all out of the hospital because we had that conversation on the flight where we didn't have our masks. You see, that's why we're here today. Great. So maybe we needed for this to happen in our country so we can figure out who the real smart people are. And that's true also in medicine. One of the smartest voices in medicine, you all know, Dr. Peter McCullough. You can't say enough about Peter. If it weren't for, Dr. McCullough somehow found out that I had made a couple of videos, invited me to join with a group of doctors clear back before this article was published in the Green Journal. And this Green Journal, which I'm so happy to have, because most doctors don't hang on to things. I'm a hoarder, so I hang on to these things. This is an actual, the #1 journal in internal medicine, okay? And to get an article published in the American Journal of Medicine, the early outpatient treatment of COVID-19 infection. This article was ignored by 99% of the healthcare profession, and tens of thousands of Americans died as a result. But Peter McCullough was brave enough and successful in getting this published because he was and still remains one of the best and brightest minds in medicine. He was the editor of multiple journals, and he got me pulled in. And because of my military training and quality improvement back in the day, the military said, you're going to be one of these Demings guys. How much time you know the Demings and all that performance improvement stuff. It's good stuff. So I was the guy who in the military would build consensuses at Fort Gordon and other places, Desert Storm and places I was deployed. And so I kind of got myself becoming the guy who brought everyone together of these doctors, because we doctors have a tendency, right? We have our own opinions and we want to be heard, but you got to get everyone working together. So thanks to Peter McCullough, I got reeled in, and the rest is sort of history. But then I got other letters after this. Florida Blue Medicare said, you're now being considered for a quality audit because they saw me prescribing ivermectin. You all know where that's going to go. I'm going kind of chronologically now to show you what happened. I'm going to zip through some of this so you want to see what happened to just one doctor. I'm just one doctor. There's many other doctors, medical students, nurses who went through the same ordeal, who were drummed out of the healthcare profession. There's reasons I haven't been yet, but you'll hear about that in a second, all right? So the American Board of Family Medicine, that keeps me board certified, has been concerns about the truthfulness of the things I've said about the vaccine, right? Then they went on, this is January 22. This is, by the way, while I'm seeing 35, 40 patients in the office, I'm getting these letters left and right. Spreading misinformation or falsehoods is unethical, unprofessional, has the potential to cause harm. Now, that, mind you, about COVID-19, were they truthful about HPV vaccine causing disease and damage to children, causing Guillain-Barré, kids with progressive neurological seizure disorders, all sorts of conditions from these vaccines? No, of course they're not truthful. But for me, it's misinformation, all right? So they gave me 30 days while I'm working, trying to run 2 practices, to put everything together and try to state the evidence behind every statement that not only I made, but all the physicians at my first Florida COVID on Summit had made. It was beyond belief how much they asked me to do. I got a lawyer, many of you know Jeff Childers up in Gainesville, Coffee and COVID. Jeff's an amazing guy. I actually got him to help me draft this letter. I was invited out to Kansas to speak to a group of freedom-loving citizens. I talked to someone from Kansas earlier, and this was an amazing event because it was supposed to be a debate between me, Dr. Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey of Florida Frontline Critical Care Coalition, and the chief medical officer and others from the University of Kansas Medical Center. It was set up as a debate. It was going to be so amazing. Well, they didn't show up. They didn't show. It's just like everything else we try to, and Mark Levin challenges people. They didn't show up. So what we did is we took their statements from an interview made just before, and we challenged the statements. So here's what they had to say, all right? This is, let me see if I get this right. So Senator Mark Stephan out of Kansas was he's the state senator, amazing fellow. I'm pointing in the right place. Then there was the University of Kansas CMO, and he's the one who said, this physician, I forget his name, said, we haven't found a home yet for ivermectin. And then when they asked him more, they prodded him more. What do you think about your doctors at University of Kansas using ivermectin instead of these people being in the hospital? His response is there's no real data on it. Means he had never used it, obviously. I used it over 3,000. But then he said, my fear is that people will take ivermectin and have hope. Have hope. This is true. And this is a doctor who's running a medical center in Kansas. And I'm glad I didn't put his name there because, it shows the level, as I've said many times, there's no healing without hope. And so when people ask me, as the only doctor that I know of in the United States that was during the COVID time, taking care of patients in the office, on the phone, and in 6 different hospitals in 2 different counties. All right, so it was more work than anything I ever did as an Army medical doctor ever, any deployment. This was 24/7, 7 days a week for months on end. And so, I'm in those COVID units, and a lot of times the family would come up to me and say, would you see my husband, my father, my sister, my brother? They've been up there for weeks. I know you're not their doctor, but would you please just go see them? Tell me how he or she's doing, and come back to me. And I had to come back, and it was not always good. It was not always good. But you know what they said to me? They said, Dr. Littell, at least you saw him, and you gave us some hope, because maybe something might have been done. Yeah. And that's how I felt for so many months. Thank you. It was a deployment for sure, but families deserve more. Families deserve more, and they did not deserve hospitals treating me like this. And again, Advent Health saying that because you were not adhering to hospital policies, even though you disagree with them, we're now removing you from the medical executive committee. Now, being on the medical executive committee of a hospital means one very important thing. It means you get to know what the chief executive officer, the chief medical officer, and the board, what they want in that hospital, what they're allowing. So I was doing that, and I'd go into these meetings, and actually I wasn't going, at this point it's Zoom meetings. We're having Zoom meetings. We couldn't meet in person, right? You all know what that was like. But when it came time for them to expand the number of rooms up in Ocala, and they said and the chief medical officer would say, well, I got good news. We've now shut down the orthopedic unit. We've got all these extra beds for COVID patients. And I've shut down the pediatric ward. And we've gone over to the Ocala Mall, and we've got beds set up at the Ocala Mall. You all remember this. This is just 2 years ago, folks. They had all these beds in hospitals or hospitals. And I say, folks, why don't we try to figure out ways to get people not to come into the hospital? Why don't you learn about what was published about early outpatient treatment, which I'm doing, and I've only had 5 people in the hospital out of thousands of patients, all right? And they're saying, the chief of the staff said, Dr. Littell, that's very good advertising for your practice, but we are not here to talk about that. All right, a kidney doc specialist. So I got very upset, and I didn't say anything bad. I just slammed the phone down. I said, you guys are going to be ostriches with your heads in the sand. You could be that way, but people are dying, and they removed me from my position. And when they relieved me of my position, the CEO said to me, Dr. Littell, you have to understand, we expect our hospitals, our physicians to be lockstep with us when it comes to hospital policies. He actually said that on the phone call with my wife listening in. Imagine that, lockstep. Remember that for later. You all know why that's pretty disturbing. Then I get a letter, mind you, I'm seeing patients this whole time, still going to hospitals, letter from the Florida Department of Health, May 17, 22. Now we're investigating you because you're prescribing ivermectin to patients. You may have violated the Medical Practice Act. That went about really shook up my world because now, with the American Board of Family Medicine, that's my residency. That means I can't take care of hospital patients or teach medical students. With the hospitals, okay, now I can't go to those meetings. I might lose my hospital privileges. With the state, that's my medical license. That's my job. I can't do anything, all right? Well, who steps up, thank God, at that time? This was a complaint followed by a University of Michigan doctor who was seeing, well, good, except the complaint, I'm sorry, I misspoke. This is the bad guy. Bad guy, University of Michigan. University of Michigan's okay, but he got wind of the fact that I treated one of their patients with ivermectin before he went. The good guy that shows up is Dr. Littell in the right place at the Knight in Shining Armor. It says, so he calls me, he said, John, what's going on? I said, Joe, your name is on this letter that I just got from the Florida Department of Health saying that I'm in trouble, I'm being investigated. He said, what name? What? Not your name, your signature's on it, Joe. And he had no idea. He had no idea. This is how these tyrannical organizations work, right? So he had a lot of house cleaning to do when he got here, Joe Littell, as you know, our Surgeon General in Florida. So then the other hospital across the street sends me for anger management, behavior modification. That was an interesting one. You all know me. I mean, I'm an old Army doctor, and I will confess I did go to anger management when I was in the Army because I did, there was some stuff I didn't like then too, and I'm a New Yorker and Irish and all that other stuff too. So there you go. I didn't like some things, but I had to learn, and thank God the Army did good things for me. They helped me to learn, and they actually helped me, it helped my marriage, it helped me being a better dad. But the only anger outburst I had was when I was rounding on a Sunday, again, 7 days a week, and I see the pulmonary doctor in the doctor's lounge, and he and the nurse are talking about how this guy's dying now and they're taking him off the life support. And I turned to this fellow and I said, why is it that you're not thinking about doing some of these things, like maybe using anticoagulants at a higher dose? Because we all know there's microthrombosis, small blood clots. And he looked at me very cavalierly and he said, Dr. Littell, I have not seen any evidence to support doing anything different than we already are doing. To which I said, as the blood's starting to boil, because I've been doing this so long, I said, the only evidence you need is that your patients are dying. That's all you need. Your patients are dying, and you're doing nothing else. And I slammed my fist, and I said a word I probably shouldn't have said, and that's when I got written up and sent for anger management. So, and the short story of that is that I did comply, because again, Jeff Childers said you can fight this or you can comply, but why don't you meet him halfway? Pick who you want to see. My daughter, who's a doctor down here in Kissimmee, family doctor, now working for me. Some of you actually are seeing her, I found out. But she says, Dad, I'm going to find you a Christian psychologist somewhere. Turns out there's one in Ocala. I go to see this fella, and I walk in the door. He says, Dr. Littell, I'm so honored to meet you. I was at your Florida COVID summit last year. And that's like the situation. That's what God's doing. We're meeting each other because this is all God's plan, folks. So he has become a real good friend of mine, and long story short, I'm still on staff at all these hospitals because I complied. And then some of you know what happened in Sarasota. So Sarasota, Florida is like this. I get these wonderful calls from Tanya, Paris, that people down there and say, I need you to come and speak. I'm saying, I can't leave my practice on a Monday or whatever, but I decided at the very last minute, I'd move my Monday patients to the Wednesday that I normally would have a half day to do some other stuff. And I said, we're going to drive to Sarasota. My wife and I get in the car at noon. I drive like I normally drive. I get to Sarasota in 2 hours, no tickets. And from Ocala, mind you. And then I get up and I speak. They weren't going to even let me speak. By the way, in Sarasota, Florida, the reason Sarasota Memorial is so different is it's run by the people there. They get to elect their own board members, all right? And so this particular group of new board members wanted to have a hearing about the treatment or maltreatment of COVID patients. And so when I was asked to speak, here's what happened ahead of time. The chief medical officer, again, getting back, I've talked about a couple of chief medical officers. When you hear chief medical officer at a hospital, and Jeff knows this, you're talking about the doctor who's owned by the hospital to kind of be the go-between between the hospital and the doctors. He's the one who has to make all the doctors happy so they don't get upset about the hospital. I mean, that's their job. So this chief medical officer down there stacks the audience with supportive people for the hospital. I mean, there's 300 spots. We go in there, it's like 250 seats are taken. People are there to sit down. I show up with my wife. They said, there's no room, you can't talk. And so thank God someone comes out and says he needs to speak. And they got me 2 more seats. I sit there. And if you haven't seen it, that's the video that kind of went viral. But I spoke out because a fellow named Chris Nelson from Epic Times at the time, he's no longer with them, but he kind of chased me down after this. Okay, so how many from show of hands have seen the video of me in Sarasota? Okay, good. Just for the rest of you who haven't, and you can look up John Littell, it was something like this. I'm supposed to have 3 minutes to talk about the injustices of the hospital. Instead, I go up and I said to Sarasota Memorial, from everything I've heard, you're a very good hospital. I spent about 30 seconds telling them how good they were. And then I said, if you really want to be this as good as you are or claim to be, you should be the first hospital to admit that you didn't do right by these COVID patients, that you could have treated them a little differently, not isolated them. And then I went into the stories that I had to tell. I was cut off at the 3-minute mark. And I said, okay, that's it. I'll go sit down. I didn't make up a scene. But then a board member spoke very kindly. One of the good, supportive board members spoke. And I had to come back to Ocala, 2.5 hours driving normally. So I go down, I walked over to the board member, tapped her on the shoulder, said, I want to thank you for what you said on our behalf. I wish I could say more, but obviously we don't have time. Call me if you need me. At that point, I got a tap on the shoulder by a uniformed police officer, and then another plainclothesman, and then another one, and they all came and they said, you got to get out of here. And then I was escorted down a long hallway by 2 very big guys, and I had no idea where I was going. And they escorted me to the end of the hospital, but I'd never been there before. They said, you got to get your car and get off the premises. And I said, I'm looking at them saying, I'm a doctor, and I had a wife. What's going on here? They said, get your keys and get the car. I said, I don't have my keys. My wife has the keys. She's in there. And I don't even know. So they get off the premises and walk. And that's when Chris Nelson caught up to me. All right. So it was a very stressful time, to say the least. It was put on I sent out about 5-6 million people saw this thing. It was something. The most amazing is that Dr. Robert Malone that night or next day says, follow John Littell on Twitter. I had no idea I had a Twitter account. So when I wrote the book, which I'll give to you later, I don't want you to leave without one. If you want it, it's $10, but just take it. I want to give it to you. But when I wrote the book, the people who produced the book set up a Twitter account. In the 6 years since then, all the liberals had hijacked my Twitter account. I went on Twitter with my daughter. I said, how does this work? And it was all like following Obama, Biden, Planned Parenthood, Hillary Clinton. So I had to get rid of 100 things I was following that were all liberal causes, and we set it up, and then Twitter happened, or whatever it is now. Okay, so again, I want to get to the end of this, because I'm just going to tell you, ABFM continued to hound me. This is the American Board of Family Medicine continuing to hound me about my unprofessional behavior. This is in March of this year. They actually withdrew my board certification, and it was a 3-month period. So during that point in time, I was not allowed to do things. However, the strangest thing happened. There was a retroactive. They didn't write the letter. They said you're going to get withdrawn on March 16, but you have to review it. I paid Jeff Childers to write a letter. Mother Jones did a whole article about it, which I won't. I thought it was kind of interesting if you want to read that. And one of the things they said is that they mentioned that I was opposing abortion rights. Yeah, I've been involved in pro-life work since way before COVID, and I think any doctor, as you'll see, any physician who doesn't want to protect the life of the baby within the mother's womb is not worthy of being called a physician.
Amen. Amen, 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 amen.
That's right. Obviously, I'm not just a rogue doctor voicing a fringe opinion, and I guess I'm worth noticing according to Mother Jones. So I got something. It's the last statement there. I went to a conference in March. Paul Marek made it stated it up. He's going to be at our conference coming up. Hospitals are evil. You figured that one out, right? Hospitals are evil. You know, thanks to Rebecca Ricks, now I have all these legal expenses. At this point, they're over $50,000. Rebecca Ricks and Moms for America set up a Give, Send, Go. Thank you, all the people who supported me on there. It has helped me, and it's going to help medical students and other doctors who are fighting legal battles as we speak. Many of them are going to be highlighted at the upcoming summit on November 11th. All right, so Jeff Childers was instrumental in that. Now, this is pretty recent. This is a few months ago, right? They said that they were going to give me my diplomate status, but I'm still liable for any claims being made at summits in the future. They said you're restored as of June 16th. Now, this is strange, but I didn't know that I really was not board certified, so I really never stopped taking care of hospital patients or teaching medical students. Who knows? But they did say that this is revocable at any time. So if I was like this next summit or what I'm talking about now, because, for example, one of their charges against me, I'm going to say what, the misinformation stuff we can all live with, right? We're all misinformers here, right? You figured that one out. The unprofessionalism that Dr. Littell manifested was only on one point, and this is what they said. Because I had compared in one talk the current medical system of America to Nazi Germany, and the fact that the physicians walked lockstep with the agenda that Hitler had implemented, I felt this was happening in this country, right? And the American Board of Family Medicine said, you are not to say that is unprofessional, and because you are saying things that are contrary to what we're saying, we're going to decertify you. And what do you hear the CEO of the hospital say? You are not lockstep with us. You see what's happening here? Mm-hmm. We need to be lockstep, or we'll get drummed out of medicine. If we criticize them for making us be lockstep, we're drummed out of medicine. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't, as far as the tyranny of modern medicine goes. So that's one doctor's plight. All right, now this is what's going to come, the last few slides. I want you all to have this on your radar. If you don't already have it, it's the third summit on COVID, food, family. We're going to discuss the attack on not just doctors and healthcare professionals, but our food supply. I've got animal scientists, nutritionists discussing mRNA vaccines, all the aspects of nutrition that you would know, from everything from infant formulas all the way through to the controversies about statins and hyperlipidemia. Everybody who's anybody with COVID is going to be there. The doctors, you may recognize the Beef Coalition, the author of the Carnivore Diet, who's pretty much a who. Dr. Latipo will be there himself. And you go to prescribetruth.com for that, all right? 2 more slides here. This is very important. How did tyranny take hold in medicine? How did all this happen? And you guys, today the speakers were amazing, absolutely amazing, right? The education talk about what happened in education, the FBI, what's happened in the FBI. I'm here to talk about what's happened in medicine in my 34 years, ever since I got out of the Army. I didn't see this in the military, but I've seen it since. Number one, I've seen that there's this blatant discrimination against persons of conscience at every level, from high school to college to medical school to residency. If you don't ask people their pronouns when you're going for your interview, you'll get drummed out, all right? That's one example, okay? Number 2, they're talking now, ever since I got into medicine out of the Army, it's about procedural medicine. ICD-10 has over 500,000 codes, international classification of diseases. All right, current procedural terminology. Doctors are being trained to do things all the time. As I say, they medicate, they operate, they vaccinate, but they never educate. That's what the doctors are being trained to do. It's about the money, all right? It's a disease model. I am being told every day I'm being told, because I take insurance, I could do some other things. I take insurance, and the people who were with the insurance company say, Dr. Littell, your patients can't be that healthy. You got to get more diagnoses on there. They must have renal failure. They must have kidney. They must have heart disease, cardiomyopathy. They must be because the sicker the patient, guess what? The more I get paid. The sicker the patient, the more I get paid. Why? Because they have this perverse incentive that says if you make your patient look really sick and you keep them out of the hospital, you're a really good doctor. Right, as opposed to just having to be healthy. So if they have no problems, I don't get at the end of the year, I don't get a big bonus, which is what doctors are doing. It's a disease model of healthcare. The hospitals are buying us out left and right. As of 6 years ago, there are the least amount of doctors ever in independent practice. We're now less than half the doctors that own their own practices, more than half are owned by hospitals. by DaVita, which used to just be dialysis centers, now owns thousands. United Healthcare and Optum, insurance companies own thousands of doctors. All right, they're given marching orders. They are lockstep. Physicians have abandoned hospital care. All right, this is the biggest problem as far as I see it. We do residencies for a reason. The residencies, we live in the hospital for 3 years after medical school. And then for whether it's lifestyle issues or whether it's the fact that the hospitals have drummed us out of there, they're just not there anymore. That's why Dr. Marek says hospitals are evil. I tend to agree. All right, you don't have anyone there to advocate for you. With Obamacare, he introduced, by the way, I was going to be in the Trump White House with 5 other doctors if it were not for Senator McCain. This, thumbs down on his plan. Because there were 5 of us, there were doctors from all over the country, and I had my security clearance, and we were going to roll out a whole other way of doing medicine that was patient-centric, and yet Obamacare is here to stay. And the annual wellness visit, how many of you on Medicare know that every time that doctor does that little drill, can you remember 3 things? Can you spell world backwards, draw a clock, or they'll come to your home? That's money in the pocket of the doctor, and that's how they're controlling us. That's how they've been taking these doctors who have really good minds and turning them into robots and asking stupid questions every year, just because if we don't get paid. And that's how it works, right? That's how it works. And the last thing, second to last is the emergency medicine. I love my nurse practitioners are amazing. But when they're taking over healthcare and there's not enough doctors, unfortunately in the nursing model, they're going to be following protocols. There's independent thinking nurse practitioners, but you got to be careful. You need doctors, and unfortunately, we got to find the right blend of mid-levels and doctors who are independent thinkers. And also with the alternative direct payment models, as I mentioned earlier, I could go that route. I could get rid of 80% of my patients right now in both offices and make twice as much money and work 1/3 of the time I'm working now. I don't do it because of my commitment to serve. I don't do it because I believe patients, school teachers like my kids, school bus drivers like my mom was for 40 years, all right, deserve health care. Medicaid patients, even though I have to get fingerprinted, deserve health care. TRICARE patients deserve health care. Retired New York City cops who are on insurance programs that no one else takes but I take deserve health care, all right? This is what's happening in healthcare. We need to do something different. So, let's see. The mistrust in science, this comes out of an article in New England Journal of Medicine. I want you to sink your teeth into this for just a second, all right? This was written before COVID by the president of the American Board of Internal Medicine, which also sent a letter to Peter McCullough saying he's no longer going to be certified as a doctor if he continues to behave in the manner he has, all right? So American Board of Internal Medicine, American Board of Family Medicine, they're all in the same cabal. But this is written by the president of the American Board of Internal Medicine, July 11th. He's asking the question, he's talking about mistrust in medicine, right? And he says, in emerging social media communities, participants are trusting each other more than they trust the experts. And he cites Apple and Google and Facebook, all right, and all these whatever, right? The stubborn persistence, as an example, of anti-vaccination parents in the face of overwhelming evidence that vaccines can't cause autism is one example. Basically saying that the anti-vax people are getting their lead from the non-experts, right? That's what we talked about at the very beginning. But this is where I get really trouble when he comes up with the solutions. Hold on, what is he going to say here? He's saying our patients often have, this is true, the trust-destroying experience of feeling like strangers in the healthcare system. Well, that is sure as heck true, right? No one feels like they're getting the connection anymore. So what's his antidote to the lack of connectiveness in healthcare? The president of the American Board of Internal Medicine, writing this before COVID, he writes, the intentional use of information systems and registration protocols to capture meaningful personal information that can be accessed by many staff members who take care of the patients, right, who the patients will encounter, may be one strategy for clinicians and institutions to earn the trust of their patients. Now, isn't that a line? Isn't that a line? Isn't that just what we all need? We need information, data, computers, protocols, algorithms to engender trust between the doctor and the patient. And that's why he used an example of like a system that can identify what the patient's habits are before they leave the emergency room. And you say, okay, happy fishing, Joe, because they know you're a fisherman, right? So these little gimmicks that they're using to overcome. Well, here's what I think. This is the hope. This is where I think we're going to head back to. This is what we got to go back to. All right? And this is, if you haven't seen this, I hope this is a huge painting of this in my office, in both my offices. obviously this is Dave. This is Sir Luke Field has had this commission for the doctor who saved his daughter's life, all right? But you got to look at this picture and you got to see how far we have come from a time when the doctor-patient relationship was a sacred, a time when the physician had to use every ounce of brain power and every ounce of compassion and every ounce of faith to be able to detect what was going on in that child, in that grandpa, that grandma, that person lying in the bed. And I've made house calls in my career, and I've been, in the hospital world, and I've been in the nursing homes, and I've been in places where people are like totally abandoned anymore. And this speaks to all, this is what it's got to come back to. You got to have your sons and your daughters, and there were young people that I hope want to be doctors back there. They have got to love patients enough to say, this is going to be my vocation. They have to be able to go against the tide that has become increasingly depersonalized, that's creating robotic physicians. And then this is something I wrote that I want to share, okay? The other day, I talked about good and evil. We talk about good and evil a lot, but what sort of evil in this world prevents women from being prescribed medications to prevent the death of their baby? Well, you know what, that's happening in California right now. I'm part of the abortion pill reversal hotline. I give progesterone to reverse the effects of my Pepperstone. They'll call me anytime. They can call me right now, and they'll say, Dr. Littell, I have a patient in Jupiter, Florida, a patient in Kissimmee who just took the mifepristone. Their baby's actively dying. Can you get them progesterone to reverse the effects of that chemical abortion? In California, they have legislation to stop doctors from giving that medication. All right, what sort of evil denies patients life-saving treatments when they're in the hospital with the Alpha and the Delta variants? What sort of evil denied patients the ability to visit their family members, their loved ones, the chaplains, the priests, to give them the last rites, the sacraments for those who are Catholic, to give them hope when they had no hope? All right, what sort of evil is saying right now, vaccinate every pregnant woman and every child with these unproven, untested products of genetic engineering, all right? I can go on. What sort of evil stripped Americans of the rights to congregate in their churches, stripped children of the rights to go to school, stripped my son of the right to go play basketball for 6 months on an outdoor. He was like an only child. His older sisters were all out of the home. He had nothing to do. I could do nothing with that child because I had to work. He couldn't even go shoot hoops for 6 months. What sort of evil has done that? You know where do we find that evil? Right now, we find that evil in one solidly identified place in this country, and it's the party of tyranny. It's the Democratic Party, and we have to unseat them, get them out of our families' lives, to get people in office who value freedom and hate tyranny. God bless you all, and thank you so much for coming today. Thank you.
Dr. John Littell. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Along with Dr. John here, he was talking about Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Eric Naputi, Dr. Brian Tyson, Dr. Robert Malone. These are all docs we've had on OAN that no other networks want to touch them. They've been talking about how screwed up the medical profession is, how corrupt big pharma and big medicine is, and how the lockdowns, the masks, and the vax, we're all bullshit. Let's just call it what it is, okay? I've had COVID twice. You know what I did? Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, some zinc, and some rest, and I felt better in 36 hours, okay? We're gonna break for dinner now. No next guest, okay? We're gonna make them wait. That's probably a better plan, right? Because it's almost 5 o'clock. Well, it's up to you. I have one more speaker says he'll take 10 minutes and show you a video, and then we'll break at 5:10, or we can break down now. Do you want to see a movie clip quick? And then we'll break down. We gotta get that one out of the way because we got one more speaker after we're not gonna fit in. And then we gotta go to dinner. All right, so our next speaker, David Tice. David is a movie producer and director of a new documentary, Grid Down, Power Up. You want to control people, what do? You control information, you control the food supply, you control the power supply. 3 years ago, David lives in Texas, discovered a documentary in